Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Forgotten March. Here, we shine a gentle light on the overlooked and the nearly lost, those quiet journeys that never made headlines but shaped the land beneath our feet. If you value stories left behind in the pages of old journals and whispers of mountain winds, this is the place for you. The year, 1833. A mission into silence in the early spring of 1833, as much of the eastern frontier stirred to life under thawing snow. A small detachment of the United States Army left the flat, grassy expanse of the Arkansas River Valley and moved westward into uncertainty. Their mission was simple in form, monumental in consequence. To locate and chart a viable pass through the southern Rocky Mountains that could support military supply lines and westward commercial traffic. At a glance, the task seemed logistical merely but to those who understood the landscape's temperament, it was a march into the unknown. No one in Washington sent them off with speeches. There were no photographers, no flags waving in their honor, just 27 infantrymen, 4 civilian scouts, and 1 half-Shoshone guide who knew how the mountains breathed. Captain Elias Harper led the march. He was a quiet man in his late 30s, with dark, weather-hardened eyes and a voice that rarely rose above necessity. He had served in forts from the Mississippi to the Missouri, and had buried men in soil, so frozen it cracked like bone. Harper did not lead with charisma, but with a quiet endurance that the men trusted. If he was marching west, they believed it was possible. Among them was Toma, the half-Shoshone guide, a man of few words who walked several paces ahead of the main column, eyes scanning the horizon as if reading a book no one else could see. He had grown up in the Wind River Range, crossed these mountains barefoot as a child, and carried knowledge not found on any surveyor's map. Harper valued Toma not just for his skill, but for his silence. They left Bent's Fort on March 3rd. Their supplies were modest: dried beans, salt pork, powder and lead, canvas tents, woolen blankets, and 2 barrels of flour. Each man carried a journal for notes and a small, crude map. The journey began in optimism. The river flowed calmly beside them, game was plentiful, and the early prairie flowers had begun to bloom. But beyond the last bend of the Arkansas lay the shadow of the Rockies, snow-capped and still locked in winter's grip. By March 11th, they reached the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The terrain grew harsh. Sharp winds swept down the ridgelines, carrying cold like a blade. The snow line was still low, and trails disappeared beneath white drifts. Toma warned them of a coming storm. "The air smells of sleeping trees," he said. "Snow will rise again." On March 13th, the storm struck. Wind battered the canvas shelters. Snow fell in thick silence. They lost 2 mules to icy river crossings, and 1 soldier was nearly swept away in a flash runoff. Frostbite claimed the toes of Private Kellum, who refused evacuation. "I won't be the one to end this," he told the medic. He wrapped his feet in wool and kept walking. Harper faced a decision. The planned route would take them into even deeper snow. Toma proposed a southern detour Lucerne passage used by Shoshone elders during particularly harsh winters. It would add 3 days, but increase their chance of survival. Harper agreed. The detour led them through narrow canyons, thick with pine and juniper, where sunlight barely reached the ground. Fires sputtered in the wet air. At night, they slept in wet socks beside smoky coals, listening to trees crack under ice. The silence of the mountains was not peaceful, it was a presence, a weight. Yet every night, Harper opened his journal and documented soil types, elevation changes, and water sources. These notes, scratched in numb fingers by firelight, would later guide surveyors and postal agents who never knew his name. By March 25th, they reached the summit of the unnamed pass. Snow blinded them. Wind cut through even the thickest coats. But from the ridge, they saw the land open to the west-wide valleys, dark forests, and rivers flowing into unknown country. Harper wrote that night, "There is a silence here so complete, it seems to press the breath from your lungs. The mountains have no memory, but they permit passage when they choose." The descent was worse. Slopes slick, with meltwater turned their boots to sleds. They used ropes to lower gear and made stretchers from pine branches to carry the weakest. 1 soldier fractured his wrist. Another collapsed from exhaustion. But no one quit. They reached the valley floor on March 29th and camped beneath a stand of aspen trees, their white trunks glowing in the moonlight. They rested there for 3 days. Toma set traps and brought back rabbit. Others fished with thread and bone hooks. The men patched their boots, boiled pine tea, and repaired cracked rifle stocks. Harper rewrote his maps with charcoal, noting each river bend and ridgeline with precision. One of the scouts, Edmund Price, a former trapper, sketched the profile of the mountains in the margin of his notebook, labeling the peaks with imagined names. On April 2nd, they resumed their westward march. The air grew warmer with each mile. Rivers swelled with snowmelt. Birds returned. In one clearing, they found bear tracks longer than a man's boot. The trail followed a tributary westward until it joined a larger river that Toma called the River of Wind. It would carry them out of the mountains. But not all signs were hopeful. On April 5th, they passed through a scorched grove, trees blackened, ash still coating the soil. No fire had burned recently, yet the land still carried the memory of flame. Toma walked through slowly, chanting under his breath. When asked about the cause, he said, "Only a mistake." That night, the men slept uneasily. By April 9th, they emerged from the last barrier of cliffs. The land opened into high meadows and rolling hills. They had reached what would one day be known as Western Colorado. Harper called a halt. The mission was complete. He gathered the men and spoke briefly. "This will not be remembered in parades, but a path now exists where none did before. It is not ours, but we found it." They spent 2 more days following the river southward before turning east, taking a longer, gentler return route through low country. By April 24th, they reached Bent's Fort again. Only 2 men required assistance. No one had died. Harper turned over his maps and journals, now worn and stained with smoke and snow. He filed no official report. He received no commendation, no recognition. But within 5 years, the trail they blazed became a favored path for fur traders. By 1844, a mail line used it in winter. In 1860, a narrow road ran its length. Today, a 2-lane highway follows the same general route. Most who drive it never considered the frozen boots that once touched its ground. Captain Harper retired quietly when he died in 1861. The local paper published a 2-line obituary. It did not mention his march. Toma returned to the mountains. No record tells us where. Perhaps that's fitting. But in a vault at the Fort Garland Museum, Harper's journals remain faded ink, folded corners, a pressed flower between 2 pages. It is not much, but it is enough. If this quiet march spoke to you, give this video a like and subscribe to Forgotten March. Share it with someone who still believes history lies hidden in journals, campfires, and snow-covered silence. And tell us in the comments what other forgotten journey should we follow next.